Hi, I'm Dr Ute. I'm an accredited counseling psychologist. I am a chartered counseling and coaching psychologist and a fellow of the higher education. Just Ask is a podcast where people come online here with me and simply ask questions they always wanted to ask a psychologist. Enjoy the episodes, and if you are interested, just ask and come on. Hello, thank you for watching, and this is another episode of our podcast, Just Ask. And I'm so happy Emmanuelle is sitting here. And as you guys know, I have no idea which question she's going to ask me, so let's just roll. Lovely to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. What's the question you bring?
Okay, so as a therapist, when a client walks in, you're able to help them. But my question is more when a client doesn't want to walk in. So if because of their background, their environment, or their personality, or all three, they're just very hesitant to come. So in your experience, how do you think psychologists can really challenge that belief of, I don't believe in therapy?
It's such a great question, because you're asking me to think about people I don't meet, right? Can I just say a little caveat there? When people walk in to my clinic, when people walk into working with me, I will do the best I can to help. I can't always help. And that's maybe something to explore in another podcast, what it actually means if we can't help. But let's go back to your question. Of course, I'm biased as a therapist. I believe that therapy is something helpful, but you are right. Not everyone is open to therapy. People might have had really bad experiences with therapy. Other people say, if I would actually come to a place where I say I need therapy, there's a tremendous amount of guilt and shame, maybe even anxiety, so I don't even go there. We have cultural groups that say therapy should not exist, right? We have belief structures around that. There is a lot happening around in the world with people in different populations that say we should not need help. I mean, historically, what we said, men don't go to therapy. And what I've learned is the following sentence here in the UK: men don't go to therapy, they go to the pub. Which on the one side, of course, always elicits a giggle, but on the other side also, the sentence comes from somewhere. So I think what we need to say is, from my perspective, is I cannot persuade anyone to come to therapy. I'm not in a position to say, it's good for you, believe me, you have to. Because it's such an intimate, private piece of work we are doing together, which of course must be built on the vehicle of a therapeutic relationship, and it must be built on the vehicle of trust. And in order to have this, these components at least need to be there, or the person needs to be willing to offer these components in order to come to the therapeutic room.
And do you think the person has to already have these components to come in, or can they, because you mentioned people have anxiety, for example, about coming. So do you think they need to be at a certain level to come to therapy? And do you think maybe that's what stops a lot of people from coming?
There is an experience. It's not based on research data, it's just clinical experience. When I start working with people, what I normally do, I have an introductory call or an introductory meeting. So it's very informal, in the sense of you're not signing up for therapy, you meet me. What I do always is I say the following sentence. I say, I'm giving you an assumption. My assumption is that it is quite anxiety-provoking to sit here in the room with a psychologist. I tell you why I'm not asking the person, are you worried? Because this already means you have to share something quite private, right?
Right.
So I am giving an assumption, but I offer it so people can say, no, that's not true. Doesn't really happen. Only a few say, no, I've been to therapy before, I know the spiel. A lot of people say, it is really, really scary to sit here with you. If this sentence comes, then the person has already given me trust, right? And then we can start working with it. So to me, what it does is gentleness. Genuineness from my side to acknowledge that it is difficult for you, and an invitation to take part. An invitation is something really beautiful, because an honest, pure invitation allows the other person to say no. Without regrets, without me feeling rejected as a therapist and as a human, because guess what? I'm a human too. But it's the pureness of saying, this is who I am, this is what I can offer you. And it's your choice. Because by consistently saying, modeling it's the other person's choice, I'm allowing the other person to have control.
Right.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable point as well, because they feel very vulnerable as well. So if you say, it's also an honor for me to have you as a patient, then it shows as well that you're also a human, as you said, and you're there to help them. So they don't feel so vulnerable, and they do have that control. They can control, maybe to an extent, the modality you use and whether or not they even want to continue.
Yeah.
I was thinking, do you think tying into control, clients might find it difficult because therapy is really a science, but it's also as much a science as it is an art. So you've got that kind of struggle where it's not just like you're going to a doctor's office, it's also the art of therapy and being human.
Well, I think if you go to therapy, if you have made the choice, I'm going to therapy, you're probably driven by a wish to suffer less, to live a life that is better, to have more joy, to maybe manage anxiety in a different way, to not feel grief so much, to not being haunted by trauma. So these are just examples, right? I think all of these experiences, all of them, doing something to how you are in the world, how you live your life. And what they do is they push you out of how you knew life was, grief, for example, or how you believe life should be. I shouldn't be anxious, for example. And many people come to therapy because I'm using a word out of existential psychotherapy and philosophy. We feel as if we are befallen by these experiences, and they grab us and they pull us around and they push us. They start to have control over our life. It's the anxiety that dictates whether I leave the house or not. Yeah. It's the grief that dictates whether I have meaning in life or not. It's the trauma that dictates whether I see that situation that happens in the here and now is triggering or not. So who has control right now? Yeah. It feels it's not us any longer. And I say assume because I can't speak for everyone. Again, this is purely out of my clinical work. I assume when we are so control-less, it becomes really scary. Because we can't, that's what the mind tells us, we can't then live life so that we smile, right? And this is often a breaking point. I'm not saying people are broken, I want to be very clear. It's a breaking point for us believing we can get better. And I think this is when we need, I'm saying it again, we need therapy. Because it's not enough, in my opinion, to have a drug intervention. Because the drug intervention is not going to help you to change the relationship with these things that tend to control you, or you believe they control you, right?
Right. And you mentioned all the experiences like anxiety and trauma, they begin to control you as a person. Why do you think clients will come in and try to control the session then, or try to have that feeling of control in that way and not in the other way where you could say, I want to control my emotions and not feel like I need to control everything else? Why do they go in that direction instead?
So controlling the session, you mean?
For example, me saying, okay, I don't want to go to therapy because I feel like then, I'm in control of my life.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I wouldn't have to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So you use control in that way, as opposed to saying, okay, trauma and anxiety are controlling me right now, and I want to control them. So that's my reason to go to therapy, not the other way of that's my reason not to go.
So it's less about controlling them. It's more about noticing that the control aspect in our life has become a huge topic, right? Because when you are anxious, whether you go to therapy or not, you're going to try to control the anxiety. The problem is it's not controllable, right? So what we are doing is we are doing more and more trying to control anxiety. And, we can do this with withdrawal. So we're not going to the things that scare us. Now imagine you're scared of social interaction. As innate social creatures, withdrawing from social interaction, you are leaving your friends, you're leaving your family, yeah? So you sit alone in the room. The only thing that is still with you then is the anxiety, right? Mm-hmm. So it becomes bigger and bigger in your life. So we're doing a lot of actions, and not doing is also doing. We are doing a lot of actions in order to control that what cannot be controlled. We call this avoidance. What we actually can control is how are we engaging with the thing that scares us the most. And look, not only as a psychologist, as a human, I know what it means having to face something that scares you so much that all you want to do is to not look at it. And then we avoid. The problem is that this avoidance can take us to places which are much more painful. So going to therapy, I always say, you bring three things. You need curiosity. I need to understand what's going on there. It's an open mind. I need kindness towards myself. That's a big thing. Not many of us have that. And I need courage. Yeah? So courage in our world, it looks like these very fit people. Oh, how courageous am I? That's bollocks. Courage is literally bleeding with fear and doing the thing you need to do to work with the fear anyway. So courage sounds very beautiful. It's, excuse my language, it's damn hard. Of course it's understandable that people don't do that. Right?
And do you feel like as a therapist you need to understand what it takes to go to therapy yourself, and do you need to understand that courage that you need in order to be effective as a therapist?
Yes. I fundamentally disagree that in trainings nowadays here in the UK, I don't know about other worlds, that in clinical psychology training, people do not have to go to therapy any longer. I think this is wrong. So I'm, as you guys know, I'm a counseling psychologist. Part and parcel of my doctorate was to go to therapy. I tell you why I think it's fundamentally wrong for us therapists not having to go to therapy. Remember, there are chefs out there in the world who make beautiful food or not so beautiful food. Imagine you sit in a restaurant and the chef comes around and he says, how did it taste? Da, 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 da. And people say, yeah, I liked it. How do you like your food? And the chef turns around and says, food? I don't eat. That's totally bonkers, right? I think we need to have therapy in order to understand what it means, not only, but also to understand what it means to sit on the other side. Because we are consistently working with people who suffer, right? And this is something like any other work. You get used to it. And we need to get used to it in order to do good work. But at the same time, and that's the paradox of the work I do every day, and every time I meet my patient, my client, I meet another human being in the room. I also should never and will never be used to their suffering.
I was just thinking, a lot of people confuse being very direct with a lack of empathy. I was wondering what your take on that is.
You're asking a German in the UK. That's a brilliant question. Yes. I never forget. Let me just give you a little anecdote. When I worked for a clinic and a new patient was coming into the clinic, that's a long time ago, and the head of the clinic tried to match the patient to the appropriate psychologist, and a caring, empathic approach was something on the patient's wish list. And I never forget that. So the person who allocated looked through us. You know, we were sitting there, and it was literally, the face was yes, 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 and then I said opposite. It just jumped over me and then looked at the other people, because of course I'm known to be direct. I am direct, which in my culture is normal. In many other cultures is normal also. I struggled with it in the as a persona, as a part of being an authentic psychologist. And for many years when I came to the UK, I tried to be, as I call, English, which I always was for me the epiphany of polite. And I put these in vertical commas in, not because I'm saying it doesn't exist. What I say, I am polite and I'm not English. So my way of speaking is very different. And the way I work today, and I can only say this from my personal perspective here, is I tell people I'm direct. Full stop. And then I say the following sentence: if it doesn't work for you, let me know. If I say something that is big, you can always say, woo, Ute, rein it in. So what I'm doing now is I'm giving the person I'm working with permission to call me out if it's too much for them, correct? Which gives them the very clear understanding that they have also control over the process, correct? Which already is part of healing, because when we are befallen by things that really kick us out of life, we lose control. So here we have already a healing quality in that. And also, I'm equalizing therapy, yeah? Because you, as the person who comes to me for help, now has the responsibility also to say when something doesn't work. And in that, I believe I am not talking about compassion. I am modeling compassion.
I think you raise a good point about boundaries as well. I feel like a lot of people maybe come and that could be an issue that they're struggling with. So it's definitely a good approach. And also, I'm just picking up, you use the word compassion and not empathy. I'm just wondering what the difference is in your work.
So I tend to say I don't do empathy. I don't do sympathy. I am a compassionate human being. To me, compassion is to understand myself, and when I bring kindness to myself, it has the function of bringing kindness to the world too. Yeah. It's about, I develop myself to become a better person, so the world has something of it and from it too. And that's what, for me, compassion is. Compassion has got something to do with looking at yourself in the mirror to see how you are. Don't even gonna go to the who. It's another podcast we could do, the differentiation between how I am and who I am. And to see what needs to be done in order to develop. But not for my personal gain, but for me and the people around me. Because that's all I can do, right? I can only influence myself. I can only change myself. And through me changing myself and who I am, I can change nobody else, but I can model change. Yeah. Compassion is, for me, so different to empathy, is because empathy has this idea of sometimes big debate, is it totally different to sympathy, is it not different to sympathy? But what empathy does is, I am developing something for you so that I can approximate your suffering.
Right. And yeah, it kind of sounds like you're saying compassion comes from a place of understanding, because you understand yourself, so you can help understand others, and empathy is more a place of knowing. So I know what this emotion is. So I feel like compassion is kind of a layer deeper.
Yeah, I would say with empathy, or let me say it differently. There's a piece of research out around empathy, which asked a group of people to donate money to two different organizations. One organization looked after people who were diagnosed with AIDS because they got a blood transfusion, which then later on came to the diagnosis. The other one had unprotected sex. The people who were asked to donate money at very high level of empathy, right? So this was measured. The question was, to whom would they donate more? What do you think?
The blood transfusion, because they'd say they didn't know, so they're going to say, well, it was an accident.
So in empathy, we are having a huge bias. We're having a bias of guilt and shame and maybe even justification. Well, right, you shouldn't have unprotected sex. It's kind of a bit your fault. So the idea of empathy being an objective measurement of doing good, I think, is fundamentally wrong. Yeah, because it does not, in my view, and in literature, include the inside work we need to do, a phenomenological approach we need to do to understand our own biases, right? Because one is clear, either group of AIDS patients needed help, correct? The suffering was there. So empathy is not the goody-good-shoe, intrinsically positive, helping us to make the world better. It's just not. That's why I have stepped back.
It also doesn't seem to take in context, because if you get AIDS from unprotected sex, you might not have had a good education in terms of sexual education, and there are many circumstances in which that could have happened.
Yeah.
So I feel like empathy just doesn't, it's very in the moment and it doesn't take in the actual context. And I feel like with compassion, because you understand yourself and you've thought about it, it really makes you reflect and you can bring so much more.
And to me, compassion, and I suppose I bring in probably a little bit of maybe a Buddhist concept here. It's a call to action. And not everyone can change the world. But a call to action can be, I can change myself to the better. And it doesn't need to be big stuff. It can be little stuff. Because a lot of little stuff makes something big also. And that's why I would clearly say, if somebody would ask me, would you call yourself a compassionate person? I would say yes. Empathy, not so sure any longer.
I was wondering how that influenced the modalities that you use in therapy. And also, I guess, what modalities are, just generally.
I don't think training works in that way that you are, pondering about empathy, compassion, and then map your modality on there. Training is much more based on categories, I would say. So in the UK, and I believe also in Germany, but I've never trained in Germany, so I'm not really. Don't quote me on that, so to speak. In the UK, as a counselling psychologist, which is a HCPC accredited therapist, so HCPC is the government body that accredits a therapist, and it's probably one of the highest bodies you can have. So HCPC accredited people are, you're pretty safe with them, because let's just say there is a mess out there for people to understand what's the difference between a counselor, a psychotherapist, a therapist, a coach, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, which in and of itself is of course a huge problem, because when you seek help you want to know that you're in safe hands, and the mess that is out there, and that people can call themselves counselor and psychotherapist without any training, right? It's just horrendously dangerous for those ones who seek help. So accredited psychologists, I would say, there are other accredited bodies, but that's the one I'm working with because it's the highest body in the country. So the training works in such a way that you always have to train in CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, because it's a thing, right? To train in this, plus one other modality. But if we are going away from this is the therapy we are training in, because CBT is a magpie, I don't know how many 100 different types of therapies are actually under this umbrella term CBT. I think what we can say, we have broad worlds of therapeutic modalities. And what these different worlds are doing is they are having in their core or in their narrative a different understanding how suffering is created, right? Because at the end of the day, what I do as a psychologist, I'm trying to make sense together with my patient. How did it come by, right? Why is it there? Why is it, what maintains the thing, and how can I help you to the best in this moment in time? Yeah. If you have a psychoanalytic approach, I mean, this is something which I would say, and I'm not a psychoanalytic practitioner, so if a psychoanalytic practitioner now sees it, please be gentle with me. But the way I understand the psychoanalytic approach is it's more based around what has been put in the childhood is radiating out into the here and now. If you have a more behavioral approach, right, it's this idea about behavior that has been learned and how can we change the learning so behavior changes. If we have an existential approach, it's this idea of the human condition has suffering. So it's not something about being broken, it's about something, how can we actually live better with the human condition? Because we are humans, right? The humanistic approach says the congruent you is the healthy you. But congruence means the person you are acting out to be and the organic self. So the person you are born to be, they need to be as close together as possible. And I suppose, or I hope, I mean, feedback would be great from viewers, that when I give you this romp, you will notice that these theories, of course, try to explain suffering differently.
And because you do existential.
Also, yes.
So I'm just interested in how that changes your view on suffering and things as concrete as death, for example.
Now here my directness comes in. Guess what? Death is a fact. And people say, of course we know we die. But you know, there is a difference between knowing and knowing. Here I come back to personal experience. I had a cancer diagnosis in 2013. This podcast is now created in 2024, so I'm 11 years down. I'm healthy. Apparently it's not here, so I have survived. But my relationship to death has changed because it has become something that sits next to me always. Not in a morbid way, but the awareness of dying is a different one. Yeah.
And how do you think about it so that it's not morbid or scary? Or if it is scary, how do you deal with that?
In existential, there is the saying that only because we are dying, choices have meaning. If we wouldn't die, we would live Groundhog Day. Hence, it doesn't matter what you do, right? Because everything you do can be redone. Because we die, the things we do matter. And the choice we take matter. And we can always choose again until we die, right? And we can choose differently until we die. But all of that only has meaning because our life will end. And that for me is quite beautiful.
Yeah, I found that really powerful and in a way almost very religious as well, because from a religious perspective, that's kind of the idea of, asking for forgiveness and always trying to be a better person. And that's how I understand it. And I just find it really, really powerful in that because there's an end date, you just want to do your best. And it's kind of like an exam. That there's an exam, you really want to work, you really want to do it. And then it gives you that satisfaction, okay, I've done what I'm meant to do.
I think it's so interesting that you bring religion in because quite often I have been engaged in discussions where people said, if you are religious, so if you adhere to a religious belief, you cannot be an existentialist, right? Because it kicks each other out. And of course, we all know Nietzsche saying, God is dead. I think that the one difference is that I think as an existentialist, the person we are responsible towards is us. And I believe when you are embedded in a religion, you are accountable also to God. And that's probably not necessarily part and parcel or quality of an existential, if you are a pure existentialist. which I'm not, right? Just to be very clear, because I think purity very quickly goes to radicalization, and we know where this takes us. So yes, I think if we start understanding that we are dying from the moment we are born, it can make us rather humble, yeah. And it sometimes I say, but that's a very naive saying. Allow me to be naive and childish for a moment. It could be a counterbalance to the megalomania we are seeing in the world and in politics, because at the end of the day, you're gonna die too. That's cheery, isn't it?
No, but it does. I think it does give you motivation to improve and be your best self. And yeah, I just think it's a very strong feeling, and it's a fact. It's something that people do need to be, I think, comfortable with. And I think in therapy it's also important because it's something that you address, and it goes in parcel, like before we spoke about avoidance. So everything kind of ties in. It's just what it is to be human.
Yeah. To me, I think it ties to this understanding of purpose, why you're walking this planet. And of course, if I'm a narcissistic bastard, I walk this planet for my own pleasure. And I don't care, or as I say in lectures, I don't give a fuck about the rest of the world. That's, of course, not anything to do with compassion, right? I'm very much in awe of Viktor Frankl. Guys, read the book Men's Search for Meaning. But Frankl and, of course, Nietzsche, they say, if you have purpose and if you have meaning, you can bear suffering. Bearing doesn't mean being crushed by it and just taking it like a doormat, right? Bearing means sometimes we are in a place where suffering happens. We can't control it. And bearing means what are the things which we can, where we have choice, where we don't have choice. But if we don't have purpose, we can't bear.
Right. And Viktor Frankl, he also speaks about in his logotherapy responsibility.
Absolutely.
And that goes hand in hand with purpose.
Absolutely. And one of the first questions I always ask the people I have the honor to work with is why you're walking this planet. Why are you here? What's your purpose? Because when we do therapy, we want to change something. Depending on the level of suffering, we sometimes walk through hell. I walk with my patients, but they got to walk too. And that's not easy. So you better know why you are doing it. Otherwise, why would you?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for watching. Thank you so much for bringing your incredibly thoughtful questions. And I hope I see you guys in the next episode. Interesting questions, right? Have a look at the next episode too. And if you want to just ask, write to us and come to the studio. Please subscribe. It means so much to us.